Hi everyone, I'm here to talk to you about the cheeseburger you received in class today. Remember that I sort of mentioned that it's my handout to help you to see how to use quotations. We've talked about summary in class, you submitted an academic summary, we've talked about paraphrasing, you've submitted some academic paraphrasing work, and now in Essay 3 you have to show me that you can summarize, that you can paraphrase at least once in the essay, the response essay we're working on, and that you can also show me at least one quotation. So this is how I teach you about using quotes. And so before I show you the parts of my cheeseburgers, you see I have a handout here that I've typed up to give you 3 examples, and I'm asking you to put 1, where's my camera, 1 in your journal for Thursday's class. I want to show you some research that I did. I know a few of you are still working to find secondary sources. So the example I'm now using for class is that I'm pretending I'm writing my response essay on Inked Well by David Kirby. I think of my sections this semester, only a few people are using this for their primary source in the response essay, so I'm going to use it as my example. And so I went first and found the place where this essay was originally published. I don't really need that information, but I went to see if I could find anything about the writer on this website. So I found it here. First thing I want to point out to those using it is that there's this really cool epigraph that Kirby decided to use from Moby Dick from chapter 110. And I think it puts a lot of I did not ask you to use the epigraph for your memoir just accidentally or because I felt like doing something weird. A lot of writers use epigraphs to provide more meaning to their essays. So if you're writing about this essay, you might check out the epigraph that is not in our textbook. This is not there at all. This is the original place where the essay that's in our textbook now republished, where it was originally published. So you guys see this was the website called American Interest, or the periodical called American Interest. Nothing really super interesting at the top. It's just a copy of the essay that I can see in our textbook. But when I scroll down, I'm just going to stop and show you. There's also some other quotes here that are kind of put in as epigraphs throughout the body. So again, if you're using this source for your response essay for the class, you might check out those grayed out quotes that are in the original publication. So I scrolled to the bottom because the essay itself is the same in the textbook minus those quotes from some literature and some other places. And I found this little note about who David Kirby is, that he teaches English at Florida State University. And so this gave me something to research further, which I did, and then I came up with this website. So apparently he not only writes essays, but he writes poetry. This gives a little background on his poetry, and I found this really cool quote that I know I can tie into my response essay, because one of the things I want to talk about is his use of the interviews of the women. So in the essay, he tells about these women he talks to who have tattoos, and he wants to understand from them why they got it. So instead of just looking at them and assuming that he understands what the tattoos mean, which he definitely doesn't, he asks them, and then he puts that information in his essay. And I'm going to use the interviews as one of the criterion that I use to say that I think the essay is really, really interesting and strong, and really what an essay should be, a research essay especially. So, first off, I want to point out that he's using research. To interview people is research. It's just first-hand research, not second-hand research like we're doing with our secondary sources, finding sources that other people wrote about the topic or about whatever information we're putting into our essay. So I found this awesome quote, and I just wanted to give you a little, I wanted to show you my research process. So how did I find this information? I dug around a little bit and found some stuff. All right, so the first thing I'm going to show you is the cheeseburger. The top bun is quite important. You have to introduce your source. And I'll probably have you take some notes on this in class a little bit on Thursday, but you should understand what I'm talking about. Introduction to the quotation is not the introduction paragraph. It means that you have to have a transition between whatever you're saying in your essay at the point where you're about to put the secondary source in, and you have to give some kind of introduction or a lead-in or a setup so that we know the source is coming. And it sort of works like a transition. So you see there's 4 options, 1, 2, 3, 4. And I'm not going to show you all 4 of these, but I'm going to show you the author's full name. I'm going to show you this one, how I'm connecting the secondary source to the topic I'm writing about. And then I'm probably going to use this third one. If I'm thinking about my last example, it's kind of this third one, where I'm pointing out the expertise level of my secondary source. All right, so here are my quote lead-ins. Let me find my document. I copy and pasted the quote from right here into my draft. And pretend that these are full paragraphs. I'm just showing you the first part. So here's my introduction number 1. Poetry is at the heart of much of the author's writing. So I'm connecting the quote to the idea that I want to point out about his essay. I'm responding in his essay to how brilliant it is that he's used these interviews, and I want to go ahead and claim that they're bordering on poetic, to use the interview information that he gathered from talking to these women who have tattoos. Here's my second top bun of the cheeseburger, where instead of giving an idea of how I want you to think about the quote I'm about to give, I tell the name of the source, and I say this according to the Poetry Foundation, and then I give the quote. Okay, so that's more, a little bit number 1 right here, and a little bit number 3. I can't attribute this to a specific person because the Poetry Foundation has staff writers, and the website doesn't tell who wrote this information about David Kirby. And then my last introduction or setup to my quote is this one, where I'm definitely using that word expertise. You know, on a website known for its expertise on poetry, readers learn that. And if you use a that between the verb that you're using to set up your quote, you know, you can say a source says, or a writer points out, or a writer argues, and use that specific writer's name. But I'm using this idea of readers learning something from this website. But I don't want to put a comma because I'm going to use the word that in place of the comma. So I'm just setting up 3 different, I'm going to highlight them again, 3 different ways to introduce your quotes. And you see that each time there's different punctuation. This one has a colon because it's a full sentence, but I don't want to put a period, because if I put a period after writing up here, then I'm going to not have my quote introduction anymore. It's a separate sentence, and I want that line and the quote to go together so there's a clear connection for the reader that I'm setting up my quote. This one has a comma after that, according to. This is a very popular one for even just saying according to and then giving the author's name. And then this one I've done completely different as well by not having punctuation, because I have the word that in place of what would normally be a comma if I didn't have the word that there. Okay, so what we just went over was this. The top bun of the cheeseburger. You have to introduce your quote. You can't just drop a quote in. It's like a big bomb that explodes, because we can't know what's the connection for you, the writer, between what you just said in your last sentence and this quote that you're putting into your paper. So those introductions are really, really important in terms of helping us to see who said what before the quote even shows up. And then also that transition idea that I was mentioning before. The middle part of the cheeseburger here, this is where all the MLA rules are. And I'm not going to go over a lot of that in this video, but I'll just point out that I have the same quote each time, and I have the same in-text citation each time. I'm going to just keep highlighting them so you guys see it's exactly the same. I didn't have to do very much for my examples, but copy and paste them in here. But you might be wondering where the heck I got my idea. Where the heck did I get my information for this in-text citation? And the thing is, with web sources, as we discovered when we were writing Works Cited entries for that example website, Works Cited entry we practiced together in class, that if I don't have an author name at the top, and I don't, and if I scroll down to the bottom of this little write-up on the author of the tattoo essay, I see there's still no author named. So I can't put an author's last name in my in-text citation because I don't have one, okay? So my next thing I'm going to look for, the next thing I'm going to look for is the title of the article. But since I've already mentioned the guy's name a little bit in some of my quote lead-ins, I don't want to use that either. So I decided to use the title of the website, which I found right here. I've highlighted it in blue, and you guys see my mouse is kind of circling around it. So that's where I got my in-text citation options. Oh, and I lied. I forgot. I did use the David Kirby one. I did use the article title, and I'll explain why I did that in class. It actually has to do with the fact that an author's name on a website source is your best choice for an in-text citation for a web source, but if you name the author in your lead in here, you can't repeat it. And then the second best thing is the article title, which is here. And the third best information for an in-text citation is the website title. So I did use the David Kirby. And the reason I have it inside quotation marks is that's how we indicate that an article title is an article title, okay? And then the last part, so we'll go over some of the MLA rules that are placed here in the cheeseburger part of the whole cheeseburger in class later, because there's some stuff that I don't have time to go over in the video right now, nor do you want to listen to. And then the last part, very important part of the cheeseburger is the bottom bun. We need the bun to hold it all together. So let me show you where that is in my example. I have 3 of them, and the first 2 are exactly the same, but essentially what it says here in the hamburger is that you have to analyze, or you have to explain, or you have to be able to relate the quote that you're just using to a point you're trying to make. You can't just slap a quote in there and expect for readers to understand what you understand about the quote. I'm going to say that again. You can't put a quote in an essay where you're expected to use researched information, in this case, a secondary source. You can't slap that quote in there and expect people to understand what you see in the quote. So you have to do something after the quote, which is to explain what this helps you to see. Okay, so for my response essay, if I'm trying to, in this body paragraph, point out that his use of interviews is spectacular and that it borders on poetic, then I'm going to make a comment afterward. And so you see I have a comment here. I'm responding to the quote. So that's another word we could have here in that bottom bun, respond. I mean, that's the name of the essay, right? The response essay. So every time you have an example, which could be a paraphrase or a quote, you have to respond to it in some way so we understand what you see in this passage that you've paraphrased or quoted. And that's true for the primary source, the essay in your textbook, and also the secondary sources you're finding online. My second example, I have the exact same response as I had in the first example. And then my third example, I have to extend it down a little bit. I have a little bit more of a response because I want to tie it back to, I put some stuff in parentheses, and I'm not sure if I want to keep it like that or not, but this is just my draft. But I want to echo back to other parts that I have written about in previous body paragraphs. In body paragraph 3, or paragraph 3 of the essay, I'm going to talk about his inclusion of the history of tattoos. So that's a paragraph that's already happened in my essay, so I'm mentioning it again here. And then I will also mention his introduction to, in the essay mentions a situation with a guy who has a tattoo, and he was caught, he had committed a crime and he was caught because of his tattoo. There were pictures, security camera pictures that proved he was the guy who committed this crime. So you guys see I've made mention in these, in this parenthesis that he, not only is he being sort of poetic in this particular part with the interviews, but that it ties back to the other ways that he wrote his essay, and I've already mentioned those in body paragraphs. So I extended this one a little bit just to try to echo back. So the thing I need you guys to do for homework is just to practice this first part. Show me that you can do a lead-in. Show me that you can do the quote or the paraphrase, and go ahead and try to do your in-text citation. And we'll make corrections to those later. Probably not Thursday, but probably next week when we have our rough drafts in class. And then you see I have the final part of the hamburger, which is the bottom bun, where you have to respond to the quote so people understand how you're using this information in your writing. And remember, the point of today's conversation about secondary sources was that we were trying to make sure we're not just including a source because it's a requirement, that we're including the source because it actually has a connection to something that we're writing about. So that's it. That's all I have to say about secondary sources and this cheeseburger thing, which really is just the 3 parts you have to include when you're using a quotation. And we'll go more into detail in the middle part in class, a little bit on Thursday and probably more next week. All right, so I will be checking your journals on at the beginning of class on Thursday to see that you have practiced this cheeseburger technique, where you have an introduction, a quote, and then a follow-up or some kind of response. If you guys have questions, go ahead and email me, and I'll see you in class.